We had a couple of visuals that discuss Pearl Harbor, but I want to talk with you in this video about what was going on the other side of the world during this time. What's going on the other side of the Pacific Ocean when the Japanese are attacking Hawaii? Now, the interesting thing is we're going to go across the international date line. Now, no, that's not where people used to find dates before eHarmony showed up. The international date line is where one day leads into another. Right, we got these time zones coming around, and so you watch New Year celebrations. You know that the New Year starts right in Australia and in the Pacific, and then works its way around to the United States. So while the Japanese are attacking us on December 7th, 1941 at Pearl Harbor, on December 8th at the same time, they're attacking some U.S. interest in the Pacific, much closer to Japan. So this is our Pearl Harbor visual. We know that Pearl Harbor is in Hawaii, and the Japanese are there to try to cripple the Pacific Fleet of the United States. They're trying to buy themselves 9 months to a year of solidifying control of the Pacific in order to be ready if the United States is going to attack. But Pearl Harbor was not the closest United States base to the Japanese Empire. Let me pull up a map here for you of the Pacific. And so if you look, right, kind of in that upper right quadrant, we can see the continental United States. And if you come right down from Alaska, you can see the Hawaiian Islands, where Pearl Harbor is. But when you go over to the left, I want to draw your attention. Look up. Hopefully you can see Japan. They're off the coast of mainland Asia, right? We've got Mongolia. We've got China, all in red. If you come down, straight down there are a group of islands called the Philippines. Now, you remember from our early wars unit that the Philippines were something that came under the United States control after the Spanish-American War. So we had a military force in the Philippines, and for the Japanese, that's a much closer concern than even our Pacific Fleet that they assumed was at Pearl Harbor. And so at the same time, they're attacking one, they're going to attack the other. The goal being to push the United States out of the Philippines. They will eventually do that. Our troops retreat all the way to Australia, which you can see there down at the bottom part of our map before they start to make inroads back in and start to shrink kind of the Japanese expansion that we're going to see there. So, got another little map here for you of the Philippines. You can see where they're situated, and then a close-up of the Philippine Islands. Probably if you've heard of anything from the Philippines, it is Manila, the capital of the Philippines. We had forces that were stationed there, and they're under the command of a fellow named Douglas MacArthur. Douglas MacArthur, if you remember him, he had been involved in World War I. He had become a general. He was responsible for running the bonus army of veterans out of Washington, D.C. in 1932 under the orders of Herbert Hoover. And he had moved to the Philippines as a military advisor. He was basically kind of pseudo-retired and hanging out in the Philippines as a military advisor. When the Japanese come and attack, he and the United States forces are forced to retreat, and they're going south across these islands, and like I said, eventually will end up retreating all the way to Australia. This is the way he put it. So this is going to happen. His retreat will happen in March of 1942. He's very much a diva. If you remember from visuals, we said this was a guy that liked headlines, liked public attention. He says this: "The President of the United States ordered me to break through Japanese lines and proceed from Corregidor to Australia for the purpose, as I understand it, of organizing the American offensive against Japan, a primary objective of which is the relief of the Philippines. I came through And very famously, this is what he's known for saying, I shall return. First of all, we don't get a lot of shalls anymore in contemporary language. It's good to have one of those bouncing around. But this promise that he will come back to the Philippines is one that he will eventually keep. It takes a couple of years, but eventually the United States will liberate the Philippines. And in a radio address to the Filipino people that I've got up for you on the playlist, he tells the people of the Philippines, I have returned. Which is kind of like Arnold Schwarzenegger, right, with the I'll be back. So he ended up coming back. Now, one thing I want to point out here for you is you looked at that map. If you are going from Corregidor to Australia, you are not breaking through Japanese lines. You're retreating. And so, like I said, a little bit of diva. He's trying to make himself sound good. He's also telling you this is the President of the United States idea. I wouldn't be leaving, right, if it was me, because this guy says we have to go, we have to go. So making himself look a little good, right, while he is, while he's at it. Like I said, I got that video there for you. We are going to strike back. I got a movie in the film library. I'll try and link it on, the modules for you as well, called Pearl Harbor. And Pearl Harbor has Ben Affleck, Josh Hartnett in it. Not my favorite World War II movie. There's a little too much drama and inaccuracy in there, and also the worst love story I have ever seen in a movie, period. But one of the things that the movie does towards the end is it shows something called the Doolittle Raids. There's a colonel named Jimmy Doolittle who, when the United States is trying to find a way to strike back after Pearl Harbor, right? Well, we're going to win the war with this, but we wanted to kind of punch them in the nose, right? They'd punched us at Pearl Harbor. We want to fight back. Jimmy Doolittle comes to the military and says, hey, I've got an idea. I want to take bombers off of an aircraft carrier, which bombers were very heavy. If you watch the film, it was a almost impossible task to get them light enough to take off, but he does. I want to take bombers. I want to sneak out close to Japan and then bomb Japan. Now, you're not going to land these bombers on an aircraft carrier. The idea was they were going to fly over into China, crash land, and hopefully be found by the Chinese. It becomes known in our history as the Doolittle Raids when these guys are able to accomplish this. And by all accounts, it really did something to the Japanese psyche that these guys were able to hit. These guys were able to hit Japan when they thought that wasn't going to be possible, right? That they'd knock the United States out of being an aggressor. A couple of other things that happened kind of post Pearl Harbor. This one is a dark spot on our history. Executive Order 9066, which has a Star Wars connection I'd love to talk to you about, so if you're interested, let me know, is an executive order Franklin Roosevelt signs basically saying that anybody with heritage from one of the countries we're fighting in World War II could be rounded up and taken to internment camps. Now, these weren't concentration camps. Nobody's being exterminated at these camps, but you're taking American citizens, people who have been born in the United States, people who have lived their entire lives, and you're saying, we can't trust you because of basically the way you look or who your ancestors were. And so what they'll end up doing is they end up rounding up mostly Japanese. There were some Italian and Germans, but mostly Japanese, and putting them into internment camps for most of the war. One of the only ways you could get out was to actually join the military. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team was made up of young men who joined from the internment camps to go fight for their country. They fought a lot of times in Italy with great distinction. More Medal of Honor winners come out of this unit than any other unit in World War II. And again, they're fighting for a country who had their moms, dads, brothers and sisters in internment camps back in the United States. This is our visual for internment camps, and so you'll see this one again. We've got one of the books that I would recommend from World War II is one called Farewell to Manzanar. that deals with, kind of gives the perspective of an actual person. It's a true story, someone who lived during that time of internment camps.